You're listening to the Faith Chats podcast, where we hope you will be challenged and inspired in your faith journey as you hear how God has changed the lives of ordinary people like you and me. I'm your host, Lydia Garner, and today our guest is my dear friend, Jenni Craggs. And no, she's not the one from Weight Watchers. Today we will discuss her massive belief shift from atheism to faith in God, as well as her life with chronic pain. During the interview, she was fighting off seizures, and I wasn't able to move due to a back injury that happened that morning. The audio quality isn't as good as a result, but don't let that distract you from the message. I know you will be challenged and encouraged as you join us for this faith chat. All right, well, welcome, Jenni.
Thank you.
Good to see you again.
Good to be here.
And I look forward to sharing your story and what God's done in your life.
Yeah.
Now, can you tell us about how did you begin your walk with God?
I didn't grow up in a Christian family. I was actually mum to two little children when it began. So I was already married in a very non-Christian marriage. And I was reading a conversation on Facebook, funnily enough, a very heated conversation. And it was a lot to do with what you might call New Age practices, things like Vipassana, which is like some sort of retreat that people go on and do quite intensive things. And there were a couple of older women in this conversation who I really respected because I always thought of them as very rational and scientific. So I looked up to them for that reason. And in this conversation, they were expressing their Christian views. Now, one of them I knew was Christian, but I'd kind of tried to shove it out of my mind because to me, even though I thought I was quite open-minded, I had this block about Christianity, like it was a stupid thing, and there was no really room for it these days. So there's these two women. They're not just speaking about Christianity in a mild-mannered kind of way. They weren't being like rude, but they were being very passionate about the fact they didn't believe that Christians should be practicing these sorts of things. And some of the things that came up in the conversation, they actually sparked off in me thoughts like, how can you be so narrow-minded? I laugh at myself now, yeah. I felt kind of repulsed by a lot of what they were saying because it was so strident and didn't leave room for all these other ideas. But as I processed this, I wasn't part of the conversation. I was literally just reading. I was a silent observer, and something really pricked me. So on the one hand, was really repulsed by a lot of it, repelled by it, kind of. But there was something in me going, yeah, but what if it's true? What if it's true? I reckon now, looking in hindsight, that's probably part of the Holy Spirit drawing me. But I had to respond to that. So that meant that I then ended up in a back and forth of conversations via email with one of these women. And she answered loads of my questions. And I came to understand what Christianity really was. Because until then, and I think a lot of people will feel this way or think this way, I'd assumed it was just where people believed that if they were good enough, they went to heaven. And I had always had a kind of my own made-up philosophy that if there was a God and they were a good God, then surely they wouldn't judge us on which religion we followed, but on how we lived our lives. And what I learned through this woman was that Christianity really taught that none of us do good in light of God. God's goodness is like to the stars and back. And human goodness, like we're just trying to jump off the planet, if you want to, put it like that. And I'd always had quite a deep interior, like my own internal idea of morality, and would try really hard to be a good person. And yet I knew, and especially as a parent, I knew that I failed daily to be nice and kind even, or do the things I wanted to do, even with, and especially with sometimes the people I love most. So this all came together for me to think, yeah, I can't even meet my own moral expectations. If there is a God and they're perfect, and this perfect goodness is that much, so insanely huge I can't even contemplate it, then I'm doomed. what am I supposed to do? And that's where it made sense, like, that you needed someone else to do the work for you. And that's where I understood that Jesus is the one who comes and lives the life we cannot live. He dies the death that that we were supposed to die, to pay for all our sins. And he makes a way for us to be righteous with God again. And it all made sense. But I was still unsure. So I took what I always say was a literal leap of faith at that point, because I kind of got to the point of thinking, if I don't make a decision deliberately, then by default, I've chosen not to believe. So that's why I was like, okay, so I'm going to just go with this. But I didn't know whether I would stay the course.
Right.
Yeah. So after talking to this person again, that evening I prayed, and that was the beginning. But then to sort of follow that up, I did lots and lots of reading, lots of apologetics, which is, having a defense for the faith. So lots of understanding the science behind all the evidence for why we can say with confidence that there is a God. And then I remember getting to the point where I was like, wow, I'm at that stage now where I'd find it harder not to believe in God than to believe in God. And then the next step was learning about the resurrection, so about the evidence for Jesus's life, death, and resurrection, and realizing that it was incredibly strong, and thinking, okay, if I can believe that, then that's what the rest of the Bible hangs on. And so I can trust it because I can trust this evidence. We've got so much incredible evidence for this incredible, most momentous thing in history. It's amazing. Yeah. And just to go on a bit of a tangent, but it's like, it is incredible that God had chose a time to come into history in a place and a time where it could be historically validated, so that people to this very day, if they want to, can just go check it out.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
It is. And a lot of people don't realize that.
I know.
They don't realize how much evidence there is, and that it's not just this blind faith.
Exactly. It's not blind faith. So it's a very frustrating phrase to hear that. I understand it because I kind of thought that myself, and that's kind of the way the media is tuned to telling people what Christianity is, and the fact that they don't give the right impression of what it actually means to be a Christian anyway. Like that whole belief that I had in the first place, that you just believed you're a good person. It's like, no, we're all in the same boat. We all need the help.
Yeah.
And it's right there. Yeah.
And there's so many decisions and parts of life that people are truly doing in blind faith.
Yeah.
They don't actually know why they believe what they believe in a lot of areas.
Oh, absolutely.
And so as you start to identify the purpose for your different actions or why you do what you do, you're able to see how much people don't necessarily understand why they do what they do, and which is why people don't like to talk about taboo subjects.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a defense.
Yeah.
And that's okay. They can live their life like that. That's fine.
Yeah.
But it's not how we choose to. We try to have a reason for everything that we do.
Before I became a Christian and afterwards, there was a lot of sort of laying down of beliefs that I had picked up without really thinking about it, because there's a lot of that going on in our, I just think in normal life anyway. So one of the things was there were some things to do with health and probably some feminist ideas, but that might have come sort of partly before and partly afterwards. Becoming a mum, actually, because I spent a long time thinking that being a mum was a stupid idea. Why would any woman want to do that? Like, that would waste of a life. And now I'm like, it's the most important, wonderful thing for a woman to do. I mean, it is, if you have other callings in your life, that's fine. But it's not. Should be something that's celebrated, and it's not. So there were all these things that kind of I started to lay down, and then was able to lay down the biggest one, which then led to more laying down and really thinking through what I believe and why. So yeah, it's been a big, long journey.
And what would be your advice for someone who starts to look into God and things, and then they have the head knowledge, but how does it get to the heart?
So I think, let me think before I just waffle.
It's like, like the surrender part, because anybody, the devil believes that Jesus is real.
Yes. Yeah.
The devil knows the Bible, and the devil will quote it.
Yes.
Satan will quote it. But yeah, it's how do we get to that point of surrendering
and acknowledging Jesus is necessary.
Yeah, so I think it must come down to recognizing our own sinful nature and our real need, because you can kind of have a mental assent to the Bible. And lots of people these days do. They sort of talk about cultural Christianity and how there's more and more people like Richard Dawkins who've been quite anti-Christianity and now coming out saying they can see how it's good for our society. But you need to recognize for yourself that you know deep down that you're failing, like I said, to meet your own standard of goodness. And so that's, I think, that's for me where it starts. It's that sense of, I need help. I need this. And also from that point, you look at what Jesus did on the cross and you think of, and it started before the cross, for those that don't know, the torture he went through before he even got on that cross, that he did for us. I mean, that makes me, it genuinely brings tears to my eyes because he didn't need to do that. He didn't need to come down and even be on earth with us. He could have just let us come to, the fate that our sins would bring us. And that would have been entirely just like any offender that goes to court for some violent crime or whatever and gets put in prison or whatever punishment they get. It's entirely just. But he doesn't do that. And so just it comes from that recognition and acceptance that I need this. And then you recognize what a big deal it was. It wasn't just a simple little thing that God did. It was a massive, unnecessary thing. And you didn't deserve it, but you got it anyway. And I can't really explain it any more than that it has to be your own person. You have to dig deep and be honest with yourself.
Yeah. And that we aren't enough.
Yeah, which is what the culture tells us all the time.
Yeah,
you are enough.
Every time I see that, I'm like, no, we're not. Jesus, and that's why people keep committing, as they say, to not trigger things, unaliving themselves.
Yeah.
Is because we are not enough, and nothing that we can do will ever be enough.
No.
And we know that. We know that to our core.
Yeah, there's some part of us that really does know. That's why people have to keep telling each other, you are enough, you are this, because deep down most people know that they're not. You might have that's not to say people don't do good things.
Right.
I think we've really got to pick apart the fact that there are people out there that do amazing, wonderful things, but that doesn't mean that they don't also lie to their children or like even just, the bitterness and anger. I think subtle things can be the worst. Sometimes the daily bitterness that can live in a family, that kind of thing. We don't think of that as being a big deal, but it really is, especially in the light of a perfect, holy being.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is you can be a really, really nice person with a really kind heart and desire to love others, and you can find it really hard to identify that you would need to be saved, to use that term, because no, I'm a good person. What would I'm not a murderer. I haven't done this. I haven't done all these things. And yet we have done even just one thing, and then we're not good enough for a perfect, holy heaven and God.
I remember seeing some sort of social media post years ago now, but I was a Christian, so it was about some sort of pedophile type offender, but it was the comments on it that were sort of like, oh, hang him, do this, do that. And I just had this real striking moment of thinking, well, how disgusted people are with this particular offense is pretty much a good way of thinking about how God sees sin in general. We don't want to think like that. We don't want to think about ourselves like that because it's not very comfortable.
Yeah.
But that maybe helps some people think about what it's really like, that it's not, the difference we feel between ourselves and someone who does that kind of thing is probably not anywhere near as big as the difference between what we get up to and what God's standard is.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I was, reading about Satan the other day, about Lucifer as one of his angels, and this beautiful, beautiful angel saying, I want to be God. I want to be like him. I want to be him, and exalting himself to that. And when we're saying that we don't need the salvation of Jesus' blood, we don't need his sacrifice, then we're saying that we are bigger than God.
Yeah.
We're better than his holiness. And we're obviously not.
No.
But that's pride. And that was what Lucifer's problem was pride. And that's why God had to send him out of heaven, because that cannot exist
No.
in the holiness.
Yeah, it's we just, even as Christians, I think we totally don't perceive the grandness, the scale of God's goodness and his justice and his mercy and all the attributes, and we just can't contemplate it. So when the big day comes, I think even the most pious Christian who's got a very good theology is going to be astonished. Yeah, we just don't get it.
Well, and even when you think about, as Christians, we look forward to Christ's return. We look forward to the rapture, whatever time people believe that is. And yet every time that I think, oh, Jesus comes soon, I also think, I am so overwhelmed with your mercy, because every day that he delays is another chance for someone to accept his gift of salvation. And it astounds me, and it humbles me, because he's so much more merciful than me. Like, I would have said, okay, we're good now.
Yeah, we're done now.
And yet there's so many more people that don't know him yet, and he's giving them another chance and another chance.
And on the flip side of that, I remember a couple of years ago when I was learning, I learned a bit more about some pretty dire things that happen in the world that we all kind of know are happening, but I just sort of, it was more in the forefront of my mind for a while. And that was a time when, for me, who hasn't grown up being Christian and still sometimes struggles with like genuinely desiring it to come to an end now, because there's people out there that I love and that don't know him yet and all this stuff, and even just wanting to see my kids do things. But when I thought about these other people, children especially, and the suffering that they go through and the evil that is out there, that's when I was like, no, this is why God has to bring it all to an end. He can't just let it go on and on forever. So there's sort of a tension between those two things as well, but it just goes to show that he has the goodness and the mercy and the justice, and we need all of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we can't focus on just one element of God, because he's so much more than that.
So much more.
And people often make God in their own image, and that's one thing that I see a lot when I talk to people, even Christians, who just simply don't know their Bible.
Yeah.
Because they don't read it.
Yeah.
Where they have sort of wishy-washy teaching at church that only sort of teaches what's comfortable. Mm-hmm. And it's like, no, that's not who God says he is.
Yeah.
And so we can't apply that. That is not God. He defines himself. We don't get to define him.
No, exactly. And it's funny, some people will lash out at supposed attributes of him, often when they just cherry pick a bit from the Old Testament or something. But again, it shows a lack of full understanding. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we see things through our little human lens, which is so piddly. Yeah. Can't think of a better word right now. Yeah. Yeah. It's sad though.
Yeah.
Because people are missing out, and because they don't know. It's not just about what you want to avoid in eternity. It's what you want to gain, because it's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's hard to remember myself every day. But that is the thing. It's not just about, it's not just a fear of something awful. It's like he wants to bestow amazing treasures on us. And just as being in his presence is going to be something beyond what we can contemplate right now. Like it talks about having fullness of joy.
Yeah.
It's like fullness of joy. I've never known fullness of joy. I don't even know what that is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was how you've had some physical ailments. Mm-hmm. You're dealing with that even right now.
Yeah. So I've always had odd health things, but before this major change of events happened, God was actually very mercifully leading me away from a type of theology that wasn't helping me, and isn't biblical, in my opinion, which is where there was a lot of emphasis on God wanting you well all the time, that healing was always part of his plan. And multiple, like, one of the teachers I was listening to that I really value, as well as my own Bible reading, multiple things were coming into play to just really solidify this idea that God can use suffering for his glory, but also to grow us, that he was more interested on this earth in our character growth, in developing us as to be more like Christ than he was with our temporary comfort. And so I'd been feeling a bit off for a week or so, and I was actually due to have a heart checkup because I was getting these tremors, and it would feel like when I would sometimes get really hungry and then be like, felt really weak and tremory, but it would, like, I'd have to go lie down and it would last a couple of hours, and it was really intense. Anyway, I was at a Bible study with a lovely group of women who were just really amazing. And even in that Bible study, one of the last things I was saying to one of the people quite enthusiastically was just about how much I could see now how God could use suffering in a good way. And I'd been feeling a bit funny. I had a little bit of a tremor going on, I think, and said goodbye and left. And one of the women who was leaving as well, she got into her car, I got into my car, and she knew my leg had been a bit weird as well by this point. So I sat in the car seat and I was like, oh, no, I can't actually drive right now. It's quite bad. So I got back out and laid on the grass, and she got out of her car as well and came over. I was like, I'm just not going to drive till it's better. And then it turned into like a full-on, my whole right leg went crazy, just would not stop, just more than just a tremor, like a intense, just shaking madly. So ended up, instead of going to pick up my kids, I got into her car. We said, can my friend look after the kids for longer? And we went to A&E. By the time I got to A&E, it had actually subsided, but I was drenched in sweat. And then getting from the car outside A&E to the reception, it all kicked off again. So it was pretty much my right side of the body, kind of like a seizure, but on one side. And she stayed with me, my friend stayed with me, amazing friend, the whole time I was in hospital, which was till about 11 that night. And these seizure type things would go on for ages. I remember that it finally subsided, and a doctor finally came in to see me and did a couple of little, reflex tests, and my body went mental again, like super bad. But it's funny because me and my friend, we were able to joke through a lot of it until it got to the point where my heart rate was so high, and I felt just like I was running a marathon against my will, and it was a bit scary at that point. But mostly we were able to laugh and talk, and I was able to pray through some of the worst of it as well. But even through all the pain and stuff, I just was never really. I got a little bit scared when it felt like I couldn't do anymore, and I was going to just, not be able to take it anymore. But there was a peace throughout the whole thing. It was because it felt like genuinely everything about what God had been showing me at that time was about God can use suffering. And so I had no sense of, I just wasn't even really frightened by what was going on. I just felt like, okay, this was unexpected, God, but okay, we can do this. So I was just able to lean on everything he taught me. I was so grateful that he had brought me out of that other teaching and prepared me in such a way. Now, I would say that some people might think that I brought it on myself, because if you believe in that sort of teaching, then, and this is why these things can be quite harmful in the church as well, because people can end up feeling very isolated if people assume things about them that aren't true and don't help. Anyway, you can edit that out if you want to.
No, I think it's very legitimate. You're saying that some people believe that if you have things that are going poorly health-wise, that it's because of decisions that you've made or sin in your life, or they don't.
Lack of faith. That's the biggest one, yeah.
And that is very isolating.
And so the fact that I'd been learning specifically that suffering could help you, I feel like some people would think, oh, well, that means you've basically come to have faith in suffering rather than healing. You know what I mean?
Right.
Whereas I was learning to have faith in Christ regardless of what happened in my life. As opposed to in that time, there were so many times where I sort of would be seeking this, reading the Bible to try and solidify this premise that healing was always what he wanted. And I'd get to the point of thinking, I have to just stop thinking about this. I need to just think about Jesus because this is so distracting. And it wasn't. So once I got out of this and really opened my mind to the fact that just see what the Bible actually says, it was so freeing, so freeing. And yeah, so all that just held me through that time. So then the first 6 months was super intense, and I was in bed a lot. My daughters had to take on a lot of extra tasks, responsibilities that I was always kind of wanting them to take on anyway more, but there was no sort of, it was just kind of like all in at the deep end. So I'm very grateful for them doing that. But I also realized after a few weeks that I hadn't explained to them that everything was okay, in the sense that they were quite scared by what was going on. And because I'd had this peace, I hadn't thought how it might look from the outside so much. So for them, they were a bit freaked out, and I needed to tell them. One of the things I had to explain clearly was there is no what's the word I'm looking for? Like, this isn't fun, but I'm gonna be sticking around.
Right.
I can't think of the word I'm trying to say.
Right. Well, it wasn't like it was going to.
It wasn't lethal. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Goodness me, there we go, a bit of brain fog for you. So there was all those times, and then there were people at church there were loads of people at church who obviously were super supportive, lots of prayers and all that. But there were times where, because there was lots of symptoms. There are lots of symptoms. There are lots of symptoms, but particularly the big episodes that are they're called functional seizures. They're pretty violent for me a lot of the time, and I had one at church because of some loud noises that set me off in those early months, and it was distressing for other people. So I would often be comforting the people around me, being like, "I'll be okay. It's fine. Everything's fine." But I know lots of people who go through this same condition, and there's not much. Lots of people don't know about it, even in the medical world. So a lot of people are quite left alone. There's no support really in a lot of places. There's so many people like me who didn't know how to access the information to understand what was going on with their body and mind, brain, and also don't have the peace of God to hold on to. That I know there's so many people that are really struggling, and because I struggle, I really do struggle, and there's times where it's really hard, but I have something more concrete than what's happening in my body. Mm-hmm. I don't always hold on to it as best as I should, but in that 6 months to begin with especially, it was like he prepared me and it carried me through. Mm. And I feel really for those people out there that on the practical level they don't have the support, and then on the spiritual level they don't have anything. Yeah, it's just, this is all I've got. Yeah. And when it's crumbling all around you, because, as a mother, not being able to cook meals for the family, or having to miss out on taking kids places or being with kids and stuff, there's so many things that you feel like, partly you feel like you're letting everyone down, and then you feel like you're being a burden. So another element where God has really helped in that sense is I can still feel those things, but I know that we all have this innate value that Christ has given, and that he can use these things for me and my family in some way. Even if I don't understand it, he can use all the difficult times for better things that he sees as good. Right. So it's just something, can't really explain it. There's a foundation underneath it all that just means you don't collapse. I've often thought, so like this goes back to before my husband was a Christian, I used to think about when we were going through struggles, that it was like we were both in this rocky, stormy ocean, and we were both struggling, but I just felt like I had a life jacket and he didn't. Mm. And I feel like that's often it doesn't mean you don't feel the pull of the water or whatever, and it can be scary sometimes, and all that stuff, you can feel a lot of stuff, and yet you're buoyed by this hope. Yeah.
And that's so powerful.
Yeah.
And that's, and even with suffering, this morning when I hurt my back, I do not think that was a coincidence. And I saw that almost immediately as, okay, Lord, you are helping me to have some empathy, some more empathy for what she's going through as I sit here on the couch and can't really move, but I can talk.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, that helps me to better love.
Yeah.
And in the future, as this pain will go away, hopefully very soon,
Hopefully,
that I can have a lot more just understanding, and suffering changes us.
Mm-hmm.
Grief changes us.
Yeah.
You had to grieve the things you were not able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And how long has it been happening now? Like, when did it start, and how long has it been going?
So February 2022, and then I kind of went into remission. It got really, really bad, and then I kind of went into remission, because this is a very strange neurological disorder where it can chop and change. Symptoms can come and go, and you can go into remission, and it can start all over again. So it's very unpredictable. So 6 months of intense stuff, and then it sort of mostly disappeared until about halfway through my pregnancy, when it all ramped up again. And then since then it's been pretty... I was blessed with like the postpartum period, actually, apart from passing out the day after I had him. I was I didn't have like the seizures and stuff, which I was so grateful for, because recovering from a C-section, that would have been horrible. But then it's sort of, I think, sleep deprivation doesn't help, so that's been quite difficult. So it's been about 2 years of varying on and off symptoms and stuff. Yeah.
And just to be clear for those that listen, it wasn't vaccine induced.
Because a lot of people thought that. Yeah. Which is actually, can I just say, and you don't have to put this in, it has, being someone who's not, who chose not to go down that path with vaccines, it's another thing where it's opened my eyes to thinking a little bit more open-mindedly about the fact that you cannot pin, if you are someone who doesn't think vaccines are a good thing, you still can't pin everything that goes wrong on those things. And it's not very healthy or helpful to do that.
Right.
So we've got to be measured in our thinking. Whatever our stance is on anything, we need to really try and calm down the emotional side and think through things, and not always be looking for something to back up our opinion. Yeah. Even if you really believe that your opinion is correct.
Yeah, well, even with Zeke.
Yeah.
I mean, he'd never even seen a doctor. He
Yeah.
never had any vaccines, and yet he died of cancer in a very, very fast time.
Yeah.
And he had a pretty healthy diet, and we'd done the right things.
Yeah.
And I talked to some friends when I was in the States, and they said that, one of them said that she really struggled with anger when she found out that Zeke was sick, and through that time, and that he died, she's like, why them? But we've seen so much glory given to God through it.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to have a reason. And it's like when you miscarry, you don't always, you may never know.
No.
And it's not because you did something wrong. It's not because you didn't have the right thoughts about that baby.
Yeah.
It's not because of anything that you did. It's just sometimes there's things that happen we don't understand.
Mm-hmm. Do you know, when it comes to what your friend was thinking, I remember, I think we've all who love you have processed Zeke's passing in our own ways as well. It hit everyone. And I had that thought come to my mind, like, there's such a beautiful, godly family. And then I was like, and what better family could walk through this and glorify God at the same time? I wouldn't wish it upon you.
Yeah.
But yet I can see that that God knows that you can bear it. You know what I mean? And I actually think it's a crazy, hard, beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And we don't have to understand why at all.
Yeah.
We can be grateful knowing where he is. That's the best part.
Absolutely.
That's the best part.
And I think it's part of our human nature is desiring to attribute blame. And we see that from
absolutely.
Adam and Eve,
Mm-hmm.
from the very first thing that went wrong.
Yeah.
We can see that.
It's her.
Yeah. And it's just a natural response, is want to have somebody to blame because we have this strong desire for justice. And that's exactly what we were talking about regarding God, is that we're made in the image of God.
So we we respond in a sort of mirror image of his attributes, his good attributes, but ours are all a bit muddied and twisted.
And he desires justice as well, which is why there has to be punishment for sin.
Yeah.
As we bring it back to that, so there is suffering in the world. It's not because, like they have the story in the Bible, it's not because of the sins of the parents in that instance. He hadn't done anything wrong. Yet, he was in a place where when Jesus healed him, Jesus got the glory.
Yeah.
And he was in the right place, in the right time, in the right situation, where God could be glorified. And that's how I see Zeke's story. He had an amazing life. Mm-hmm. He had an amazing childhood. He had a strong faith. And God has been able to amplify, God's name has been amplified through his story. And Zeke is my little preacher boy. And Zeke has been used by God all around the world in a bigger way than if he was in a small little church his whole life and had served God faithfully there. He did serve God with his life.
He did.
And that's what we're doing in our little corner of the world. And here we can be recording this in super rural New Zealand, in the middle of nowhere. And yet it can be heard all around the world very easily, thanks to technology. Yeah. And giving God the glory through our suffering. Yeah. And through your pain today and through my pain today. Mm-hmm. And yet we can smile and we have hope.
Yeah. And that is the most incredible thing. I wouldn't mind taking a moment just to reflect back on something you asked me earlier, which was about how you get from head to heart knowledge. Mm-hmm. And something I don't think I've told you. But when Zeke left us and went on to somewhere better, I had a new struggle that I hadn't had before, which was I'd had this, what I felt like was quite a strong faith growing. And then I was really rocked in this way. It's not like because I understood all the stuff we just said. I wasn't questioning why in that sense. But I suddenly had this new thing that became quite unnerving, which was like, this was the first time I needed it to be true. I hadn't really come up against that, even in my own difficulties with my health and everything. It still was not eternal in that sense. And so I grappled that with for months and months, on and off. And it also brought up other things that were really difficult for me, stuff about my own past and stuff. I'm like, am I really forgiven, blah, blah, blah. And it was really hard, and it was quite a dark place. Not like I wasn't dwelling on it all the time, but it was quite unsettling, especially after having this kind of quite strong faith through one of the most difficult things I'd been through. But even that, the shaking gets rid of things that you need to get rid of, and it also helps you then have to look at stuff where you had sort of glossed over and hadn't really delved deeper. And so that in itself was a good thing. It was hard and very uncomfortable, and yet it actually became a good thing. So even then, look, he's even impacting my life in quite a significant way, in a way that you wouldn't have known about or thought about probably.
Well, I'm always very glad to hear ways that God's worked. And I've heard so many different stories that I tell people I'm so excited to share his story and our story. And I don't generally cry through it, partly because I have seen so much good come from it already, that it's a consolation. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I cry a lot. Yeah. Other times, not generally around other people. Yeah. It's very rarely around other people, actually, because it's usually just in quiet moments. But when I'm around other people, I'm just so excited for them to have seen God. Yeah. And seen his faithfulness through it all. And is there anything that you'd like to say as we get to the end? What would you say to perhaps a fellow friend that hasn't accepted God as we have and accepted the gift of this hope? What would you say to them, or in regards to hard physical things, what would you like to say?
I'll try not to waffle on, but on the one hand, I would say that if you seek him earnestly, genuinely, like it needs to be genuine, because people will say they do it and not really. There is so much out there. He will respond, but also there is so much, if you're like me and you need hard evidence, it is out there also. That you might think you've got it all together, but you're only thinking in terms of this short lifetime. And as Paul says, he talks about suffering, and he says that it's I'm going to forget the phrase now. I say this quite often, but it is but a light affliction. And he's talking about in the light of eternity. This is but a light affliction. So that's to do with suffering, but I mean, this is just a snapshot in the light of eternity. So however good you think you've got it now, God has got so much greater for you. And maybe not in this lifetime, but in the lifetime that's never going to end, that's going to come. So I would just say seek him with an earnest heart, an open heart, and reach out to people who would like to help you. Because there's plenty of us, we all want to help if we can. And then to do with physical hardship, well, I've kind of already said it, but that when it's hard, then you need to remember that it is but a light affliction, and that he can use it to grow you, and to be on the lookout, I guess, for other people who are hurting, see how we can help each other. Especially, I just like to say, with the push for euthanasia and everything going on, it's pretty intense and a bit scary. That's really I'm really aware of how many people in sort of support groups that I'm in, since I began a couple of years ago to now, there's already quite an increase in people like contemplating whether the suicide, like assisted suicide, would be the best way to deal with their problems. And that really strikes me of like lack of support and lack of hope. And so for the Christians out there especially, don't forget to look out for your brothers and sisters and those in need. It's not always easy because we're all busy and everything, but even just fellowship and friendship can be something that just might be the lifeline to someone who's feeling very isolated and alone. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. And I appreciate you coming. And, you know, as you've even dealt with tremors while you're here, and as you've even felt, seizure coming on, that you have, put in the effort to come and share this, because it is powerful. And suffering it's for a season.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what I say with Zeke being gone. Like, this is just a moment.
Yeah.
And yes, Jesus could come back any moment, and it could be that I just have to miss him for one more day.
Yeah.
Or it could be longer than that. I don't know. But I know that in light of eternity, it is. It is just a moment.
Yeah.
And that hope is everything.
Absolutely.
And that's what this podcast is about having eternal perspective and having a real faith that affects you every day in every way. Mm-hmm. And that there's nothing that isn't showing God's faithfulness if we trust in him.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, friends, for joining us today. Have you been challenged? I certainly was, and praise God, at the end of the interview, I was able to stand up on my own for the first time in hours. Jenni suffered a lot immediately following the podcast, but still gave God praise through the serious struggles that came in the following days. What a sacrifice to get her story out. Maybe you've had time of severe health issues, or maybe you're able to relate in this very moment and needed to hear this right now. God is ready to hear your cry, friend. He is there by your side. You aren't forsaken. He desires to give you comfort and rest, even if sometimes that is mental rather than physical. If you'd like to chat, please reach out through social media or on my email address listed in the show notes. If you have felt encouraged or challenged today as you listened, please subscribe to the podcast so you can hear more interviews like this one. Please share it so others can be reached. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss the encouraging faith chats to come. We have no guarantee of a tomorrow, so friends, let today be the day that you sort things out between you and your Creator. Only you know what may be keeping you from the close relationship He desires to have with you. Every story is valuable, and your journey, whether you are in a valley or on a mountaintop, can be used for God's glory.